This video contains detailed descriptions of real-life violence, murder, and forensic investigation. Viewer discretion is strongly advised. Some content may be disturbing to sensitive audiences. Please proceed with caution. On March 12, 1999, a resident of Huangzhuan village in China's Anhui province was on his way to the nearest village to buy some wheat for his farm. During his walk, he stopped in the village of Dizhuan to relieve himself when he suddenly found a red high-heeled shoe, something out of place in the rural village. He walked a little further into the farm and found a second matching shoe at the bottom of a small canal. Soon, a fellow villager arrived on his bicycle, who was flagged down by the other and told him his concerns. Together, the two men ventured further into the farm and wheatland. They discovered a watch with a silver-white metal chain, with its cover having fallen off. He went to grab some wheat straws that were covering the watch, only to recoil as he felt the straw stained with sticky blood. Venturing further, they found a pair of plaid pants thrown in front of the wheat field. After just 4 or 5 more steps, they found a dead body slumped against a stack of straw. The police arrived and quickly got to work. Needless to say, all the clothing and belongings found scattered across the farmland belonged to the body. As for the body itself, it belonged to a woman who was described as slightly plump with fair skin and a round face. She was approximately 26 to 27 years old, stood at about 1.65 meters tall. Her hair was short, and tattooed eyebrows and eyeliner, which was out of place and a little expensive for such a rural village. Unfortunately, there was nothing nearby that could be used to identify her. The police found her head to be slightly sunken in and covered in blood. She had been hit on the head with a blunt object, which shattered her skull and damaged her brain tissue, resulting in death. Her body was also bruised, likely from the same object striking the rest of her body. She also bore ligature marks on her neck from strangulation, although based on the cause of death, the strangulation was likely post-mortem. Although she had been partially stripped post-mortem, there were no signs of sexual assault or rape. The area where the body was found was located close to the border with Hunan province and on the borders of Anhui, Xinqiu and Linquan counties, and so a lot of people would pass through the area on their way to their main destination. The police began with door-to-door inquiries around the immediate area, but none of the locals recognized her. They then put up notices and flyers across the area, the nearby counties and cities. They also did some investigations in Hunan, but only in the counties, towns and villages immediately bordering Anhui. DNA testing was unfortunately not too advanced back then, and a small rural police detachment in one of China's inland provinces didn't have access to that technology readily on hand. Eventually, they exhausted all leads available to them, and the case was closed with the victim remaining unidentified. She was cremated soon after. On September 24, 2009, a man went to the police station in Xinyang, a city located in Hunan province. He told the police that 2 months prior, he had been told that his cousin's ex-wife had been murdered. His wife was named Mei Li, and the two he was led to believe were responsible was a man named Yang Zhicai and his nephew Wang Fuwei. The police tracked down his cousin to speak to him directly. He said that he and Li were neighbors and lived in the same village. In 1995, the two got married through a matchmaker. After their marriage, he moved to Guangshan County east of Xinyang City and opened a dental clinic where Li worked as an assistant. They maintained this arrangement until 1996, when they both divorced on mutual and good terms as they simply didn't have compatible personalities, as they often argued with each other in full view of the public. After the divorce, he found out that Li was pregnant. So he arranged for her to work at an ophthalmology clinic run by a good friend of his, a father of 4 named Yang Zhicai, and his wife. Zhicai was a doctor practicing independently, living in Linquan County in Anhui. He met Li's first husband in 1994 via a mutual friend and were so close to one another that they started calling each other brother. Li moved into that clinic and stayed for 6 to 7 months before giving birth to her baby. She then stayed for an extra 1 to 2 months before moving away. The last time Li was supposedly seen was in November 1998 by her first husband. Afterward, nobody had seen her, and her parents, who were living in Heilongjiang province, couldn't contact her. Li's family traveled all over Hunan in an attempt to find her but failed to make any headway. Starting in 2003, they even looked beyond Hunan, traveling to Sichuan province and even going to Shanghai. Li's ex-husband was also alarmed as she invited him over regularly to visit their son, only to abruptly stop. Sadly, they wouldn't even know where to look. After her divorce, Li was homeless, and so tracking her whereabouts and even most of her adult life would have been very difficult. They were led to believe she had likely left to find employment elsewhere as a migrant worker, something not unusual for the time. Because of this, they never reported the disappearance to the police and had no reason to believe any harm had befallen her. Due to a lack of sophisticated infrastructure at the time, they didn't find the lack of contact too alarming either. So why were the police only informed now? In July 2009, Jitsai's wife suddenly called him and asked for a meeting. At that meeting, she suddenly said, Mei Li was murdered. When asked how she knew this, she said, because the person who killed Mei Li is my husband, your good brother, Yang Jitsai. She then told him that her nephew Wang Fuwei and her niece Lu Lifang were accomplices. She told him that the only reason she came forward now was because Lifang's husband found out about the crime and, rather than going to the police, he tried to blackmail her for 1 million yuan, threatening to expose their involvement if she didn't pay. Feeling the pressure rise, she decided to come forward. Well, the days of Jitsai being a small-town doctor were long gone. He opened many cosmetic medical clinics in the area, often in rural areas, and would make frequent donations to various charities and the less fortunate, engaging in all kinds of public welfare efforts. In Xinjiang, he was practically a household name. And beyond that, he was one of their wealthiest residents. In fact, he had amassed so much wealth that he managed to become a multimillionaire. He was said to be a self-made one, too, as his family was not at all from a wealthy background. And what of his background? He was on January 15, 1962, born in a small town in Anhui known as Songji and only had a small education, with his highest education prior to his career being that of a technical secondary school diploma. That being said, he proved to be very knowledgeable when it came to medicine. During his youth and early adulthood, he spent most of his time moving between several counties in Hunan, specifically near the Xinjiang area. Whenever they arrived at a village, Jitsai would use his minimal medical training to be the village's local doctor, as they lacked any doctors already living there. In the 1990s, his family settled in a town in Hunan's Huaibin County known as Zhaoji. His family were said to be the only people from outside the village to ever move in permanently and set up business. And speaking of business, Jitsai's first one was rather small in scale compared to what he'd go on to do in the future. He and his wife first set up a stall on the street to treat eye problems for the local villagers and even those from surrounding areas. This stall did so well that they had to rent 3 rooms on the upper floor of a small 2-story building in town to serve as both a full-time clinic and a place for their family of 6 to live. The clinic was just as successful as the stall, and the locals described Jitsai's ophthalmology skills as superb. His wife was just as capable and often ran the clinic by herself whenever Jitsai had to leave town for something. Both were described as friendly and straightforward and never had any conflicts that the locals knew of. Jitsai himself went as far as to say he was never in any fights. In the mid-1990s, Jitsai for the first time met Li's future husband who ran a dental clinic about 100 kilometers away in Guangshan County. In 1997, he lived at Jitsai's for about a month or two, learning ophthalmology from the couple and contemplating starting his own dental clinic in this very building. While living here, Li showed up and told him that she was pregnant and nearing delivery. Due to strict policies at the time when it came to family planning, he unfortunately couldn't bring her back to his home to give birth, which is how Li came to stay with Jitsai and his family even after her ex-husband left the clinic. While in Guangzhou, Jitsai saw the emerging beauty industry and how booming it was and saw the potential in breaking into that industry himself. And so Jitsai went to Xi'an to study cosmetic surgery, including facelifts, double eyelid surgery, and breast augmentation. In 1999, Jitsai and his family moved out of Zhaoji and opened their first beauty hospital in Xinjiang. By 2001, they had opened their second store and then more and more. By 2009, the couple 3 medical beauty institutions, 30 beauty and wellness clubs, including 1 flagship store in Shanghai, and over 100 joint venture stores. They essentially ran the entire beauty industry in Xinjiang. They were also called local pioneers as they were among the first to open up beauty stores in the area. With all that wealth and an immaculate reputation, he felt uneasy about going to the police and publicly accusing him of murder, especially in the absence of a body or even proof that Li was dead. So, having no solid evidence that his very rich, powerful, respected and overall good friend was guilty beyond just heresy evidence, he kept his silence. In September, he confided to his friend and told him about his, and he went to the police almost immediately after. The police decided to question Jitsai's wife first. She completely denied setting up this meeting and telling Li's ex-husband about the murder, and in fact, said that she learned of her possible death from him instead. Due to conflicting testimonies and, once again, no real evidence, the police didn't move forward with the report, and many thought it would have ended there. On November 19, 2009, a woman went to the police station in Jieshou, a small city in neighboring Anhui province, to file a report of her own. This woman's name? Lu Lefeng. While Lefeng was one of the accused, she was not here to confess and, in fact, told a different story than what the police in Xinjiang had heard. There, she accused Jitsai and Fu Wei of murdering Li, but she wasn't involved. According to her, Li had been killed at some point in February or March of 1999, she only remembered the time frame because it was quite cold outside when the murder happened. The night before the murder, Jitsai, who back then simply ran one clinic, called Li over and asked her to accompany him the next day to a pharmacy in Linquan County to pick up some supplies for the clinic. Jitsai also asked Lefeng and Li to go to the pharmacy first and wait for them there. They made their way to a bus station in the Qingguan, and upon boarding the bus, they waited for Jitsai at the pharmacy. And then they waited some more. By the time Jitsai had finally arrived, it was dark out, and Jitsai proposed they find some place to stay, and they'd simply grab the pharmaceutical supplies the next day. After dinner, the 3 of them checked into separate hotel rooms. Lefeng went to the bathroom while Jitsai stayed in the other room to speak with Li. After a while, Jitsai and Li entered Lefeng's room and told her that the 2 of them were going out to collect and pay off a local debt, leaving her in the hotel room. Just before midnight, Lefeng heard a knock and assumed the 2 were returning. She went to greet them, and there were indeed 2 people entering the hotel room, but neither of them were Li. Instead she saw Jitsai and Fu Wei but not Li. And oddly, Jitsai wouldn't tell her where she was. In fact, whenever she asked about Li specifically, they would just ignore her and not respond in any capacity. Even more concerning was the clearly visible blood stains on Fu Wei's pants. After enough pushing, Jitsai finally said, "Mei Li was killed by the 2 of us." Hearing this news caused Lefeng to collapse to the ground. As for why she didn't go to the police, she once again didn't know where her body was or what they had done. Jitsai also threatened to tell the police that she brought Li here, and thus she would go down with them. Just for good measure, he also threatened her more directly. Her paranoia was another factor in her keeping her silence. In June 1999, she left her uncle's clinic and went to Shenyang for work. While she was away, somebody poisoned her home's water tank, causing her family to suffer the effects of poisoning. Luckily, the poison was weak, and their lives were never in danger, they just fell ill. Lefeng was led to believe Jitsai was responsible. In order to escape any further attempts, assuming the poisoning was indeed intentional, the family moved to Huangzhou. While her husband was ill and near death, in a sorta inverse deathbed confession, she finally told him about what her uncle had done. He passed away in April-May 2009. Lefeng started dating again, and after meeting her new boyfriend, she told him the truth right off the bat, and he encouraged her to go to the police. As with the report in Xinjiang, there was no solid evidence implicating Jitsai, and he didn't even live under their jurisdiction, so there wasn't much for them to investigate. Speaking of Xinjiang, as the 2 reports were made across provincial borders, the 2 police forces didn't know about the report the other had received. It seemed as if Jitsai would never be questioned. On August 30, 2012, nearly 3 years later, almost completely out of the blue, the police in Jieshou tracked down Li's ex-husband and started questioning him. One officer, a while after Lifang left, suddenly remembered an old cold case involving an unidentified woman found in March 1999. Afterward, they did some more digging and discovered the police report from their neighboring province. After tracking him down, they wanted to see if he could identify the body as Li. Since the body had been cremated, all the police could do was show him photographs. They showed him a collage of pictures showing the corpses of women, with photo number 7 being Li An, and the police didn't tell him who was who. When he pointed to photo 7 without even looking at them all over, the police took that as positive identification. On September 27, 2012, the police placed Fu Wei under arrest. Before the police even asked their first question, Fu Wei said he knew the arrest was because of Li's murder, and he was quick to confess. He told them how the two carried out the murder, but he couldn't remember where they left the body, just that it was outside the suburbs of Linquan County. On September 28, Jicai was arrested in Wuxi in the Jiangsu province and extradited back for questioning. Unlike his nephew, Jicai denied any involvement in the murder. The police didn't let up and kept the interrogation going until Jicai finally cracked and gave in, offering up his confession on September 29. According to him, Li and Lifang both worked and lived at his clinic during that period. However, he believed that Li had poor personal conduct, which drove away customers and clients. Examples he cited were how often he brought men home to spend the night with her and that she was overall a poor and lazy worker. This made Lifang, so she told Jicai that she wanted her fired. Although other witnesses who knew Li said she was nothing like this, Jicai stuck with that story in his confession. Li was always willing to help out with housework when she was out visiting. She was just as respected by the residents of Zhaoji as Jicai was, which is why many didn't believe Jicai. Jicai didn't think termination was an appropriate punishment, so he went to talk with Li. He politely asked her to stop, but according to him, she reacted to this in a very rude manner and continued to defy him and do whatever she wanted. Jicai, as mentioned, didn't think firing her was appropriate, but he seemed to think there was nothing wrong with killing her instead. On March 11, 1999, Jicai asked Lifang to take Li to Linquan to buy keratitis medicine for the clinic, then he met up with Fu Wei and brought him to Linquan County with him. That night, Jicai and Fu Wei lured Li to the rural village east of Jieshou to settle some debts and accounts with the clinic. When they were near the straw stack next to that road, Fu Wei hit Li on the head from behind, using a steel pipe. Jicai then took the pipe from Fu Wei and hit Li on the head and body several times before strangling her with a rope. Afterward, they dragged her body deeper into the wheat field before fleeing the scene. While Fu Wei claimed not to remember, Jicai was taken to the area and pointed out where the crime scene was, and Fu Wei's memories of where they left the body came back to him. After his confession, Jicai expressed remorse and said, "I regret it very much. I just wanted to teach Mei Li a lesson and drive him away, but I didn't expect things to turn out like this." Their confessions didn't match though. Fu Wei said that the idea for the murder came from Jicai's wife, who wanted Li dead because she and Jicai were having an affair. This claim might have some truth to it. According to a former employee, who had worked under Jicai, he was fairly promiscuous, and had many affairs with the clients who walked through the doors of his beady shop. He had in fact dated many of the customers in silence at the same time, who were each unaware that they were only one of many mistresses. Although rather than his wife ordering Li's death, Jicai might have done it on his own to maintain his image with the local community. The police arrested Jicai's wife on September 30, but she denied any involvement and absolutely nothing linked her to the murder. On October 29, 2012, she was released and faced no charges. On January 4, 2013, the police were happy with their investigation and transferred the case over to the prosecutor's office. The first sign that this wouldn't be a clean prosecution came on August 1 when they were both granted bail and allowed to leave the prison. Then, on October 21, 2013, the Fuyang City Procuratorate made a controversial decision. They decided not to move forward with the charges, and the case wouldn't be brought to trial. Despite confessing, it looked like Jicai would get away with it. The prosecutor, though, was quick to justify their decision by saying they didn't have enough evidence to win the case. No DNA samples were taken, and the body was cremated, so they had no real way to definitively identify the body as Li's. They also had no direct evidence implicating the two, such as a murder weapon, only circumstantial and unverified eyewitness testimony. Upon his release, Jitsai went on a media blitz, constantly giving interviews and speaking with reporters. He would profusely plead his innocence and accuse the police of coercing a false confession out of him. He even went so far as to accuse the police of torture and that they told him to act like he knew what he was doing at the crime scene. He seemed to have an explanation for every question thrown his way. When asked why his own niece reported him, he told the journalist that, toward the end of his life, Lefang's ex-husband had suffered from poor eyesight and used to get treated at his clinic. Over the years, her ex-husband went completely blind. Lefang claimed malpractice on Jitsai's part for the cause of the blindness and demanded 1 million yuan in compensation. When he refused to pay, she started spreading false accusations and slander in retaliation. When asked for his alibi, he told the media that he left to study in Xi'an with him arriving in 1998 and his studies didn't end until 2000 when he returned to Xinjiang. Therefore, according to him, he didn't have the time or opportunity to commit the crime. As for the media and the public, they seemed to believe him. The media even went back to Zhaoji to question the residents who were all unable to believe that Jitsai could be a murderer and remembered him fondly. His business was still booming and he soon found himself crossing the threshold and became a billionaire. Meanwhile, for Li's family, especially her parents, this decision was as heartbreaking as it was baffling. Especially troubling was their justification for dropping the case. Li's family, including her ex-husband, very easily identified the body as Li when shown pictures of her, and Jitsai and Fu Wei pointed out where the body was found, so how could they justify releasing him on the grounds that the body was unidentified? But alas, there seemed to be little they could do but just watch their daughter's likely killer re-enter society as a well-respected and almost beloved man. From 2014, Jitsai and his wife who stood by him continued their charity work, often organizing various activities to honor the elderly, care for children, and support and fund education in the poor and rural Chinese countryside. Just like the last time, the police felt they had identified the body, the second time seemed equally as sudden. It was October of 2018, and veering on the 20th anniversary of the body's discovery. While the body itself was long gone, one investigator with the Jieshou police suddenly had an epiphany. Sure, the body was gone, but the soil surrounding the body and some sticks of straw were stained with blood. The police sent the blood from both samples for DNA testing, and on October 14, 2018, the results came back as a match. After nearly 20 years, the Dizhuan Jane Doe was finally identified as a 27-year-old Mei Li. The identity of the body was the main reason behind the prosecutor's decision to drop the case, so with that issue eliminated, the police arrested Jitsai and Fu Wei on October 18. Since their first brush with the law, Jitsai had only grown richer. Their reputation also remained undamaged. On September 8 to 10, 2018, a month before his second arrest, he led company employees on a 3-day visit to a local children's welfare home and community to visit, care and support the local orphans and the elderly, having continued the charity work that made his reputation so impeccable. Meanwhile, Fu Wei, now in his mid-30s, was the legal representative of a Xinjiang biotechnology company with a registered capital of 10 million yuan. They also had a new and more likely theory for what had happened. On March 11, 1999, a then 38-year-old Jitsai used the excuse of buying medicine to trick Lefang into bringing Li to Linquan County, about 60 kilometers away from their clinic, and thus harder to link the body to her. Jitsai then had his nephew Fu Wei, who had just turned 16 at the time, accompany him to Linquan. After meeting up with Fu Wei, Jitsai told him about his plan to kill Li, and Fu Wei agreed to go along with it. Later that night, Jitsai and Fu Wei lured Li to the countryside using the same excuse of collecting and settling a debt. Once they reached a remote enough area for their liking, Fu Wei struck Li on the back of the head with a steel pipe, knocking her to the ground. Jitsai then took the steel pipe and continued hitting Mei Li's head under a cover of the straw stack, after which he strangled her with a rope. They then dragged her body to a plot of land in the middle of nowhere. As payment for helping with the murder, Fu Wei was allowed to loot Li's corpse, taking the small amount of yuan she carried on her person and a gold earring which he gave to his grandmother as a gift. Jicai then began stripping some of Jicai's clothing. He knew that due to the distance between her residence and body as well as the jurisdictional issues sure to follow, he knew that Li would likely go unidentified, and by partially stripping her, he hoped the police would write her off as a prostitute killed by a client. The post-mortem strangulation was likely to serve the same purpose. Finally done, they both fled the scene. This time, the prosecutor did move forward with the charges, and their trial began on August 29, 2019, at the Jieshou People's Court of Anhui Province. During the trial, Jicai once again retracted his confession. He acknowledged that the body belonged to Li but argued that that alone didn't prove that he was the murderer and that there was only circumstantial evidence implicating him. On September 16, Yang Jicai was convicted on the charge of intentional homicide, and as punishment for killing Li, he was sentenced to death. As Fu Wei was a juvenile offender at the time, he was given a much more lenient sentence and would only have to serve 15 years. Fu Wei's more lenient sentence was further justified by the fact that Jicai was the mastermind. His role was ultimately lesser than Jicai's. He confessed from the very start, expressed remorse, and even pleaded guilty. His family also voluntarily paid compensation to Li's family without the court even ordering them to do so. Although oddly, Jicai's family also contributed 700,000 yuan, although that money was transferred into the court's account, likely to pay for the inevitable compensation ruling. The fact that Jicai would preemptively pay up still struck many as odd if he was innocent, like he claimed. Jicai was quick to appeal this ruling, and so the Anhui Provincial High People's Court held an appeal with the proceedings opening on September 29, 2020. Jicai continued to plead his innocence. According to him, he was studying in Xi'an at the time, a city in the Shaanxi province, which would be an airtight alibi if true. He once again accused the police of torturing a confession out of him, told the court that he had no motive, deeming the idea of killing a close friend over having loose morals and needing to be taught a lesson as absurd. And finally, he once more reiterated the lack of any physical or biological evidence linking him to the crime. On January 14, 2021, the court overturned the conviction on the basis of unclear facts and insufficient evidence. They then ordered a retrial to take place. On April 23, the court in Fuyang held a second murder trial, and Jicai continued to deny any involvement and stood by his alibi. Meanwhile, Fu Wei soon joined his uncle in denying any involvement, telling the court that since he was 16 at the time, he would have been in school during the murder. On November 21, 2021, the two were convicted once more, only this time, Jicai was sentenced to death with 2 years reprieve, meaning that if during those 2 years, he worked in prison, performed deeds of merit, behaved well, exposed other people's crimes or was found not to have committed any other at the time unsolved crimes, his sentence would automatically be reduced to life after those 2 years. An actual life sentence, too. This is a sentence unique to China. Often, it's simply referred to as a suspended death sentence. Li's family, especially her now adult son, were furious over this new ruling and condemned the sentence as being too lenient. On December 14, they filed a complaint with the prosecutor's office demanding that they appeal the ruling and seek a full death sentence. The prosecutor, though, refused and was satisfied with the sentence. On October 17, 2022, the Anhui Provincial High People's Court heard another appeal from Jicai. At the appeal, Fu Wei went back to taking responsibility and admitting his guilt. This time, the court upheld the sentence and took away his right to launch any more appeals, barring exonerating evidence. Meanwhile, Fu Wei had his sentence reduced to only 11 years. If this story moved you or made you think, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps us bring more real stories like Mei Li's to light, and reminds the world that even decades later, justice can still speak.